Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this evening's 35th annual David W. Belin Lecture in American Jewish Affairs. Welcome also to those streaming this event. We're really delighted you can join us. And for everyone in the room and online, we have this handy QR code. You can scan it and view live captions if you need them on your phone. You have these, they're all dispersed all throughout the room. So if anybody needs that, please use that service. We're so fortunate to have it. I'm Maya Barzilai, Director of the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies and Professor of Hebrew Literature and Jewish Culture here at the University of Michigan. Tonight, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker, Joan Nathan, very well known in this room for her research and writing on Jewish food cultures across the world. So a little bit about our endowed lecture. The David Belin Lecture was established in 1991 to provide a forum for the discussion of contemporary Jewish life in the United States. Through the generous gift of the late David Belin of Des Moines and New York, the Frankel Center has hosted prominent scholars, journalists, and writers. We have published these lectures in our Belin Lecture series, both in print and available on our website. David Belin was an alum of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, and the Business School, and the Law School of the University of Michigan. He had a distinguished career in law and public service. One of his notable appointments was as counsel to the Warren Commission, which investigated, as you know, President John F. Kennedy's assassination. Belin was a founding member of Reform Judaism's Outreach Commission, as well as the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous. His leadership roles in different Jewish American communities and his concern for the welfare of Jews in the United States led him to endow this annual lecture. I'm so pleased to have a first lecture, I believe, in this series dedicated to Jewish American culinary affairs. I would also like to extend a warm thanks to Professor Carla Goldman, here in the room, Director of the Jewish Community Leadership Program, for suggesting and making the connection, and to Caitlin Gordon, our Communications and Events Coordinator, who did a magnificent job planning and coordinating this event. And since food is on our minds, I'm also very grateful to Amanda Fisher in the back for this delicious reception. There's more out there. Yes, whoa. You're applauding that one. Okay. And tonight, and to introduce our speaker, yes, tonight we have a unique opportunity to hear from food journalist and chef Joan Nathan, graduate of the University of Michigan with an MA in French literature, right across the street here, that way. In the 1970s, Nathan worked in Israel as a foreign press attaché for Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek. This experience led her to her first book, right, The Flavor of Jerusalem. She then worked for Mayor Abraham Beam in New York City and co-founded the 9th Avenue Food Festival. Nathan's writing draws on oral interviews, historical research, and personal experience. In 1994, she published the classic Jewish Cooking in America, which received accolades from organizations such as the Julia Child Awards and the James Beard Foundation. She then hosted the PBS television series Jewish Cooking in America with Joan Nathan, and we'll hear a lot more about that. Several books followed, which we also have here, including King Solomon's Table, which features Jewish cooking from all around the world, and most recently, My Life in Recipes, Food, Family, and Memories. In 2001, Nathan was inducted into the James Beard Foundation's Who's Who in American Food and Beverage. Congratulations. So I'll end with a little snippet from an interview with the Jewish Women's Archive in which Nathan stated, quote, "Food is memory, and memory comes from traditions and repetitive traditions. If you don't have repetitive traditions, you're not going to have the memory of anything other than carry out," end quote. She also recommended get rid of your cell phones at meals. This is like talking to the younger generation. If you have teenagers, you know what I'm talking about. I would add, get rid of your cell phones at lectures, and I hope you have a memorable evening with Joan Nathan. Except for captions. I hope you have a memorable evening immersing yourself in the rich history of Jewish cooking. After this presentation, we will have time for question and answers, and pre-signed books will be available for personalization thanks to the local bookseller, Book Suite. So enjoy the evening. Thank you for coming, and here we are.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank all of you for coming. I would say don't let 7-year-olds even 5-year-olds get your cell phones. It's ridiculous. I can't keep my grandchildren come in early in the morning, so nice, and then they steal my cell phone. And they know how to use it better than I do. Well, thank you, Maya, for giving me the honor of presenting the 35th Annual David Belin Lecture. It always feels good to be back at the University of Michigan when in the early 60s, as an out-of-state student from Providence, Rhode Island, I was the first from my high school to venture to any college west of the Hudson River. And the counselor just was appalled that I was going here. As I look back, I knew so little then, certainly about the Midwest, but these were the years that I learned about the world. I remember so fondly my history of art lectures with Professor Ali Grobar, who then went to Harvard, my medieval history classes with Professor Gary Lightus, the Foreign Film Festival where I learned about Curacao and all I don't know how many of you remember them. It was fabulous, fabulous. And my forays into the work and life of Marcel Proust, about whom I wrote my master's thesis in French literature. The years between 1961 and 1966 in Ann Arbor weren't, weren't just the beginning of my academic journey. Little did I understand then they would mark the start of my lifelong exploration of Jewish cooking and culture. In 1960, 1 year before I graduated from high school, Granny Smith apples were first imported from New Zealand to the United States. And Domino's Pizza was founded in Ann Arbor, the first delivery service of its kind in the United States. No idea then that DoorDash, Resy, or any other company would deliver food from the whole world to hungry students. In Ann Arbor in those days, there was no good deli or bagel store. You had to go to Detroit for both. But I do remember the farmer's market that I passed today when, of course, I made a pilgrimage to Zingerman's with Ruth Reichel for pastrami sandwich and Carla. I'm sure I would not recognize it today. I've only been there when it's been empty. And even though I was a member of the SDT Jewish sorority, living right next door, is that better? To Hillel, I doubt if I ever went to one event there. I knew I was Jewish because I joined a Jewish sorority. I also only went to one football game in 4 years. That was enough for me. My blood remained red. I couldn't get it to turn maize and blue. In those days, Ann Arbor was a hotbed of liberalism, with sit-ins for civil rights and protests against the Vietnam War. This was also the beginning of the Kennedy administration. So much was happening: the Peace Corps, the Cuban Missile Crisis, as well as civil rights protests. At the same time, college fraternity boys followed the ridiculous spring post-war ritual of panty raids, scaling the walls of the girls' dormitories to retrieve underpants. It was like living between two worlds. As for the food in Ann Arbor, I remember fondly Drake's Sandwich Shop with its drab green walls and tall wooden booths suitable for privacy, sometimes necking, and for studying when I wasn't at the undergraduate library. The irresistible draw to Drake's was the sticky pecan rolls, which I knew from my German background as Schnecken, sliced in concentric circles and toasted on a griddle with butter. I imagined some little old lady making these rolls each morning. I realize I'm one of those little old ladies. But I learned Only recently, the Drakes ordered them and the less expensive cinnamon rolls from Quality Bakery, which closed in 1987, and Drake's, alas, in 1993. It's now a Bruegger's Bagels, started by Sweets. Of all the memories of college, it was the transformative experience of my junior year abroad in Paris that not only awakened my taste buds, but helped me understand two crucial truths about Jewish cooking. First, the laws of kashrut dominated, even if the cook wasn't particularly observant. Second, the place one lived, in this case France, pervaded Jewish cooking, which we would come to learn as countries where Jews lived around the world. Even though I studied at the Sorbonne, my friends were mostly secular French Jews whose food and customs were similar to my family's, but were decidedly French. Although they ate shellfish, they would absolutely not eat pork. For them, it reminded them of Nazi Germany, and they just wouldn't. It was amazing. Although they ate shellfish, they would absolutely not eat pork. It was repugnant to them. Whereas my mother cut onions, etc., in larger pieces, they cut them into the tiny dice that the French called mirepoix. Thus, chicken soup tasted slightly different, as did roast chicken, made by the French and in my friend's home at Rosh Hashanah with apples. This food was Jewish but Frenchified. I became totally hooked on the notion that most Jews everywhere celebrated holidays like Passover in different languages with different foods, something that has fascinated me my entire life. How many harosits, for example, are there from all over the world? And just today, somebody, I forget your name, but anyway, showed me a Manila Jewish cookbook with a Manila way of making gefilte fish. So who knew? Where I lived in the 16th arrondissement, Jews used a baguette for the challah unless they journeyed to the Marais district for a Friday night braided loaf. There were a trickling of post-war Algerian, Tunisian, and Moroccan Jews in those days, but they were not the dominant culinary force they have become today. I was at a wedding in Paris, maybe they've already divorced, but anyway, maybe 15 years ago. And he was Alsatian Jewish from a very old Simone Weil's relative, Jewish family. And at the wedding, was totally Tunisian. His wife was Tunisian. And there was one tiny plate of gefilte fish from her Polish father that he had made. And of course, the Alsatian, he didn't care one way or the other, but it just showed me how dominant Sephardic food is in France today. Even so, the contrast between French Jewish food traditions and American Jewish cooking provided a singular lens through which to begin to view cultural adaptation and preservation. Returning to Ann Arbor for my senior year in 1965 was a time of momentous change for me personally and for the country as a whole. After an idyllic year spent abroad, then quitting the sorority and moving to an apartment with two friends, I started cooking for them from Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking and Craig Claiborne's New York Times cookbook, both of which had been published in 1961. While figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, I gathered my food from the weekly farmer's market, buying yogurt, a new love for me from France, not the kind of yogurt we eat today, but plain, thick yogurt that came in glass bottles. In France, we would eat it as a dessert, with a sprinkling of crystallized sugar on top that teased the taste buds. And at night, we experimented cooking such dishes as crepes, croissants, tarte tatin, and German Jewish dishes like schnecken, or as they were known in Ann Arbor, sticky pecan rolls. It was my junior year in Paris that spurred me on to get a master's at Michigan in French literature, writing my thesis on the image of Queen Esther in the work of Marcel Proust. Although I chose working in New York afterward, instead of studying for a PhD in French, because there was a professor at another school named Kolb, very renowned, that wanted me to go on and developed the idea of Queen Esther in the work of Marcel Proust. What happened was that Racine, Jean, I forget her last name, but his mother was Jewish. She was Alsatian Jewish. His father was a doctor, and he was Catholic. And his mother would play a game with Proust where she would read one part of a Racine play called Esther, one line, and he would read the other. And they would go through these plays trying to remember them. And I think it really had such a memory for him as he got older that as he changed his image of Albert and Albertine, Esther became a man or a woman. And it was fascinating to just go through his work looking at her. Anyway. But I went to New York because that's what I wanted to do. And fortunately for me, I've been able to return to Ann Arbor through the years to promote my 12 cookbooks, to speak at the university, to visit an ever-changing food scene, in part sparked by my old friend Ari Weinzweig, and tonight to speak to you. I want to talk about how Jewish food has transformed America through the last has transformed America through the last 60 years as someone who has been both a witness and a grateful participant in these changes. I thought I would start with one of the first references to Jewish food from the New York Times. It is from a restaurant review that appeared in 1872 entitled A New Cuisine, The Jewish Restaurant, Peculiar Food, Experiences of a Seeker After Novel Dishes. And I quote, "What we actually had before us seemed to be beef with raisins, the whole floating in a sea of gravy. Beef and raisins were incompatibilities. The waiter, scenting the diner's distress, told them, 'Some people's very fond of it, but generally if you ain't born and bred up religiously, that kind of thing, why, sir, it's what they call it in this air country, rather rough. 'Ave a mutton chop, sir.' Would anyone, I ask you today, turn down brisket for mutton chops?" I think that's how it's changed. What then is this peculiar Jewish food? The laws of kashrut, as I've said, eventually written in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, were transmitted by word of mouth and united Jews in their many diasporas throughout history. These laws of separation of milk and meat dishes, of ritually slaughtering animals swiftly in the kosher manner, the inclusion of the meat or animals who chew their cud and of cloven hooves, which would exclude pork, or the prohibition of shellfish, were later expanded in the Talmud and codified and elaborated on by rabbis and scholars throughout history. This basis of eating has changed geographically, depending on where Jews lived, but not in the rules. I remember once, this isn't going to make you bored, but anyway, there was this very famous chef, Jean-Louis Paladin in Washington. He was a really good friend of mine, and I brought him to a feast in Jerusalem that Teddy Kollek was having for the 3,000th year of the city of Jerusalem. And Jean-Louis was a great foie gras maker. So he came and he figured out this way you could sort of singe the outer part of the foie gras, not realizing that the blood was all the way through it. And in fact, one time in the ancient world, they thought of foie gras as the soul of man. Anyway, so he singed it, in fire, but the rabbi said, "This won't do." So they had to throw out 40 pounds of foie gras. And so Jean-Louis said, and the rabbi said to him, "The rules have been going on for the last 3,000 years." And he said, "Isn't it about time to change?" Anyway, okay. I don't want Maya to be mad at me. Ashkenazic Jews, for example, ate potato pancakes. When they moved to El Salvador around World War II, yucca grew better in the climate, so Jews there ate yucca latkes with cilantro cream. I met an Iraqi family recently that left Baghdad in the 19th century for Kobe, Japan. In Kobe, at that time, there were no dates for their harosith, made of slowly cooked dates called silan. I'm sure a lot of you know it, and you can get it now from Israel. Iraqi Jews had to substitute in Kobe a poached apple jam instead. And this is important to remember what's going on now. In the 1970s, this family moved to New York, where most Iraqi Jews still serve the traditional date haroset. Since the children of this family grew up on the cooked apple haroset with walnuts stewed on top, that is the dish that they serve at their Seder to this day. And that's because memory is really so important of what your childhood is. And when I interviewed them for an article that's going to appear next week in the New York Times, on Japanese and Jewish food, they didn't even know that the date jam was what other Iraqis eat, which is amazing to me. But, in a sense, Jewish food, like all ethnic food then, was still a closeted cuisine, served only in the home when I was a kid, or local delis for Jews, mostly on Sundays, to either take out or eat in. For many Jews in Detroit, for example, the Sunday deli was like the local, yet at the same time exotic and family tasting of a Cantonese Chinese restaurant, where there were dishes like mushu pork and pancakes like blintzes served with it. And mushu pork, pork was disguised. I remember asking the governor of Rhode Island, who with that for 2 years was Jewish, and he was kosher, and I saw him at this restaurant he was eating. He said, well, it's disguised. It doesn't look like pork, so served with a sweet and sour sauce. The pork disguised because it was cut up. Wonton soup, similar in flavor to chicken soup, and of course, those dumplings similar to kreplach. At these restaurants, you could relax. They weren't too expensive, and you didn't have to have great table manners. Most of us ate Jewish food at home. Because I came from a Reform Judaism Jewish home, it was Friday night dinners and holiday food like matzo ball soup, roast chicken, challah from a bakery, and my mother's brisket. And I realized that it had to be in large towns where you would get challah at a bakery. You didn't get, well, I guess you consider Ann Arbor a little special time, but I saw lots of challah today when I was at Zingerman's. But and nobody was making it home. And maybe they were, but it was closeted food. That's where you ate. What you ate in your home was what you ate. Now everybody goes out all the time. Anyway, and the rest of the week we ate American food. In many ways, and by the way, my mother always made food from the Settlement Cookbook. And to this day, well, she died a few years ago, but she said, even though I wrote 12 cookbooks, it was still the Settlement Cookbook. Anyway, the rest of the week we ate American food. In many ways, it has stayed the same, but in other ways, my concept of Jewish food has constantly changed throughout my life as I discovered Jewish bakers and cooks from around the world, as well as their recipes. After World War II, Jews, like other Americans, were also drawn to supermarket processed food. Sara Lee's cheesecake and TV dinners were big hits. Few knew that the cheesecake by Sara Lee, named after Sara Lee, the owner's daughter, was a Jewish family's recipe. It wasn't until 1962 that a so-called Jewish food reached the larger American population. A few weeks ago, I don't know if any of you saw it on Instagram, there was a geisha from Japan traveling the country and cooking food, and she wanted to come to my house. And I had just gotten back, actually, from Japan. I had really nothing, but I looked in my freezer, and I had an Eli's cheesecake. For some reason, he sends them to me every year. And I didn't want to eat it, believe me, because I like it too much. So I thought, I know the Japanese love cheesecake. So she had made these delicious sandwiches with some sauce that she was making. And we had nothing else, and I pulled out my cheesecake, and they were so happy that she took the rest home. Lender's, a small bakery in New Haven, bought the first bagel machine, started freezing bagels, and marketed them nationally under their name. As the broader public, and this is just after the Korean War, As the broader public liked the bagel's chewy texture and taste, local bakers around the country became taken with the roll with a hole, either from the popularity of the frozen ones or from trips to larger cities. Today only older Jewish people know of their origin. Most consumers think they are American, and their global market value last year was $5.5 billion. By the way, again, in Japan, 28 million people, 2 tiny bagel shops. Going down memory lane, some of us will remember that at about the same time, Levy's Rye Bread ran an advertisement showing clearly non-Jewish people eating a rye bread sandwich that stated, "You don't have to be Jewish to like Levy's." It was so successful that in 1965, an advertising copywriter named Ed McCabe came up with the brilliant, "We answer to a higher authority" for Hebrew National hot dogs, an iconic American food. Don't forget, baseball, hot dogs. I mean, what could be more American? To many Americans, the word, and by the way, until recently, Costco, which is everybody's beloved national store, had Hebrew National, but now they don't. They have beef hot dogs, but not Hebrew National. And Hebrew National told me, because they were one of the funders of my TV series, that at the time, if they didn't have that, Costco was more than half at that time of all the money that they got for their hot dogs. To many Americans, the word kosher is synonymous with better and safer. But 90% of Americans do not know and do not care that they are buying kosher when they pick up a box of Pepperidge Farms cookies or a bottle of Heinz ketchup. Only 2 of the I don't know how many, 200,000 or so kosher products that are on the market today. And stores, national stores, want the products that go on their shelves to be kosher because it's going to increase, not necessarily to Jews, but people sort of look at it as, like good housekeeping. Although millions of people buy kosher food products today, about 700,000 of the 7.5 million Jews in America are kashrut observant, or about 1/10 of American Jews. For others, like some of the 3.3 million Muslims in America, vegetarians, Seventh-day Adventists, as well as regular supermarket shoppers, the kosher sign proves to them that the food does not contain pork or pork byproducts. Until the advent of the internet in 1983, that was just the beginning, campaigns in newspapers, magazines, billboards, and of course television appealed to Jew and non-Jew alike at a time when national supermarket chains did not carry Jewish products. The challenge, and this is a quote from Mr. McCabe, was to make Hebrew National hot dogs relevant to a national audience that did not know what kosher was. He told that to me while I was writing Jewish Cooking in America. But more than that, during and after the Second World War, people immigrated from Central and Eastern Europe. We sometimes forget that food in the old country was evolving just as it was here, with new ingredients, shortcuts, and new inventions like manufactured phyllo dough from a guy in Cleveland. Many recipes, and now all phyllo in Japan is made with this invention. Many recipes had what I call, or have, a culinary lag. Because they were handed down, brought out for special occasions, they were not changed here. In the old country, they were already changing. Today, I sadly put homemade gefilte fish in that category. Although at Passover, I still make it from scratch, crafting the chopped carp, whitefish, and pike, mixed with eggs, matzah meal, carrots, and onions into ovals, because my mother-in-law, who taught me so much about cooking in Poland before the war, made it that way. Today, there are fewer and fewer people who like it. It's the homemade sharp horseradish that I sometimes think is all people really like. Most people today use the jarred or frozen variety of gefilte fish. This is my favorite clip from Jewish Cooking in America.
Didn't have Joan Nathan to help her with the book, So they they really started to create their own cooking and their own baking without recipes, without knowing what to do. And it's now a gourmet cooking.
Right now it's gourmet
Now
cooking.
it's gourmet cooking, gefilte fish. I remember gefilte fish we were making 100 years ago, almost anyway. And this is how we made it.
And what kind of fish did you use in
Well,
Russia?
I don't remember it. Really don't remember. It was because I was a child. But there was plenty of fish. Jewish people didn't have enough meat to eat, but there were plenty of fish. This is why, fish was very, very free. They made all kinds of different meals out of fish. So then we used to chop the fish. We just had a plain, ordinary chopper. Hey, by the way, this chopper is already 85 years old, I want you to know.
Oh, it's a great one.
I'm telling you, since I came to this country. And we chopped our fish.
Yeah.
Then we took some onions, an onion, and we
Here's
peeled
an
the
onion.
onion, and we grated the onion.
Here, I'll hold this for you.
You cry a little bit from the onion, I'm telling you it all. It makes it, the long sleeves.
Well, you're dressed up.
After all, on the television, you gotta be a little bit dressed. We put a little bit of water. It gives a little bit taste, You gotta put a little water.
Okay.
And you gotta put a little bit salt. Here's the salt.
So
you
it-
never know how much.
you
never.
No recipe.
No recipe. Oh, what recipe? Well, no, there was no Joan Nathan's at that time.
Believe me, even with Joan Nathan's around, the recipes don't always work,
Well, but they're good though. A little bit sugar to it. Gives a little
Oh,
taste.
we'll get you some sugar.
A little
Hold
bit
on a
of sugar.
second.
Then you chop it. Then you chop it. Or you put in an egg. I usually put in, for 2 pounds of fish, 1 egg. That's enough up here.
Here's some sugar.
Just a little bit of sugar. There's no recipe in it. The recipe is your mouth.
There's your mouth. Okay. So just keep chopping,
You
right?
keep chopping it, and the more you chop it, the tastier it gets. The filling gets to be, you gotta fill it with your it's gotta be, see,
Chop,
you
chop,
feel
chop,
it.
right?
And you feel it, and you're chopping, it gets so thick-like, it's so delicious. And then you take a little bit and you taste it.
And you taste it. You don't worry about salmonella or anything
Who
like that.
cares about it?
So how often do you make gefilte fish now?
Now, I kind of got spoiled.
Why?
First thing, my children are away mostly.
Yeah.
So
How many children do you have?
I've got 2 sons and a daughter, which my daughter is here. And I've got 6 grandchildren, but my number 1 is here.
Number one. Come on in, number one. Yeah.
Here's my number 1 child. You think she's number 1 by me, but I don't know. I've got 6 number 1s. And I've got 6 great-grandchildren.
6. Mazel tov.
And they're also beautiful.
Anyway, isn't she great? You can watch the whole sequence on YouTube. But that, interviewing somebody like this on television is worth everything to me. I'd heard about her, I knew her son, her grandson, and she'd never been on TV before. After the TV series came out, she was then on, what was it called? Oh my God, I'll remember it later. But anyway, she was on another national TV show, and she had these Russian tea cookies, and the show wanted her something, wait a minute, what's her name, Lee and Kathy Lee and whatever it is. Regis and Kathy Lee, that's it. And look there, they wanted her to reduce the number of ingredients, and she said, I won't do it. She didn't care. I mean, she'd never been on TV before, but her stories, it goes, it's amazing, and her spirit is amazing. And that's, when you find something like that, you can do a series like that of people that we're not going to find them anymore. I mean, anyway, all right. I just loved her. Okay, so, but this is really what I think is a culinary lag, because people like that will make it, but I think jarred Manischewitz gefilte fish is horrible. I mean, that's what I grew up with, and I just could not. My mother would put that out, but she'd also put shrimp out for Passover. Anyway, it's just, so make your own gefilte fish. Okay. It's also rare today to find stuffed derma, stomach casings, or stuffed helzel, chicken net, cooked with schmaltz, all representing heavy, time-consuming, traditional Jewish Ashkenazic foods. No one has ever put Jewish food in the lofty categories of Italian or French cuisines, as it was not rooted in one soil, but in dietary laws, and it changed according to the flavors of the lands in which Jews lived in the diaspora. And few Americans anywhere except New York and perhaps LA in the 1950s knew what bagels or pastrami sandwiches were. Israeli, Sephardic, and Middle Eastern Jewish foods started to become known later as Jews coming from 70 countries left Israel for the U.S. in the 50s and 60s, and some opened tiny stores near their synagogues to feed Jews who ate only kosher. Because of immigrants from Syria, Morocco, etc., Jewish food, as part of American food, would soon change with such exciting and flavorful dishes as cherry and tamarind-flavored meatballs from Syrian Jews, or fesenjan, a Persian walnut and pomegranate sauce served over chicken, both dishes surely kosher but affected by where the Jewish cook lived. And I know at my Passover Seder now, every year, instead of that cold water soup that I never grew up with it, but my husband, who's a Polish Jew, did with hard-boiled egg in it. I was in Italy interviewing this wonderful Israeli woman, and her sister-in-law was from the island of Corfu, and she had this spinach, sautéed spinach in hard-boiled eggs that had been cooked forever, huevos aminados, and so I'm always testing recipes, so I tested it for one Passover Seder, and my daughter-in-law and my daughter loved it so much that we do it now every year instead of the other, the other tasteless saltwater soup. But this year I'm going to cut, because of the high price of eggs, and also there's so much, I'm going to cut the eggs in half. One group that didn't make much of a sensation in the 1950s, but has now, are the Lubavitchers, also called Chabad, who came here from Russia as a result of World War II. Unlike other Orthodox sects, they believe in reaching out to the larger community to keep Judaism alive. They are today the fastest growing Jewish group worldwide. Their free Shabbat dinners have stimulated an interest in Judaism to secular Jews, especially the idea of celebrating the Sabbath, which I always called simply Friday night dinner, with challah in my home growing up. A shot in the arm to kosher food has been their followers, including Balei Tshuva, returnees to the faith. Formerly non-observant Jews returning to their observant roots observe the laws of kashrut, but are anxious to try the new, lighter, and healthier tastes and dishes that they knew before they became kosher. They have welcomed new look-alike products such as mock shrimp and lobster made of pollock, and prefer radicchio with shiitake mushrooms without the prosciutto. When the Lubavitcher women wrote The Spice and Spirit of Jewish Cooking in 1977, it included recipes from women around the world. And when I had dinner at one of the editors of the book home for Shabbat, she included a pureed red and yellow pepper soup to start Friday night dinner. First-class kosher wines are being produced in California, France, and other countries. Kosher meals are prepared for all airlines, and the kosher market has expanded rapidly. Many people, Jew and non-Jew alike, who are sent to prison often request kosher meals as they have a better reputation than others. Now, 2 generations later, the Americanized Lubavitchers are everywhere, even where I go in the summer, Martha's Vineyard and Kyoto, Japan, sparking an interest in 3rd and 4th generation assimilated Jews worldwide. But they are not alone. In this country, in particular the Schusterman Foundation, Israeli camps and youth groups, Volunteers for Israel, Birthright, and local synagogues are also bringing Jews back to Judaism. I felt the temples everywhere until October 7th were turning to a more joyous Judaism, one of inclusiveness than that of my childhood. And things, of course, have changed since then. For mainstream Jews and others, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which gave African Americans the right to vote, also enhanced the dignity of black culture and cuisine in the eyes of white Americans. Meanwhile, the anti-war movement influenced a new generation of eaters who wanted a counter-cuisine as an attempt to return to a natural, more simple way of life with what I once considered weird foods like brown rice, soy sauce, yogurt, all of which are staples today. In 1965, under the Johnson administration, widening its response to the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War, Congress passed the 1965 Administration Act, which eliminated the rigorous immigration quota system of the McCarran-Walters Act. As a result, there was a large influx of newer immigrants, many of them from Latin America and others from countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Afghanistan, and Lebanon, countries not even mentioned in the 1967 census. All brought with them new foods and new flavors. As Calvin Trillin aptly put it in The New Yorker, I have to say that some serious eaters think of the Immigration Act of 1965 as their very own Emancipation Proclamation. In addition to all the new tastes coming to the States, the Peace Corps and other international programs gave young Americans the experience of the cultures of faraway lands, bringing back new ingredients with them on their return. In 1965, Pan Am launched their, quote, Fly Now, Pay Later program, encouraging Americans to travel abroad, using their new credit cards and giving them a chance to travel and taste food they had never experienced before. In early 1967, I went to live in New York City, where I worked in public relations for 3 years for the mission of Madagascar to the United Nations. During the Six-Day War, and later I worked for the Institute of International Education. In my spare time, I, like so many others, cooked, went to Indian spice shops and Sahadi's Market on Atlantic Avenue to buy the ingredients like yogurt and saffron not yet in mainstream markets, and devoured articles written in the New York Times by Craig Claiborne, Mimi Sheraton, and others. By the way, I bumped into Craig Claiborne once, and I couldn't remember exactly when I was going to the New York Times, maybe for an interview or something. And I asked him why he didn't want to write about my flavor of Jerusalem. And he basically looked at me and said, I don't like Jewish food. It was startling for me, but things have changed. Even then, only a tiny part of the population, Jews, were writers, even writers about cooking. It's astounding how many there are. Joseph Wexberg, Ruth Reichel, Dory Greenspan, Ina Garten, Jonathan Gold, Nigel Larson, Marion Burroughs, Yotam Ottolenghi, Hannah Goldfield, Tony Bourdain, the list goes on and on. In 1969, I visited Israel and fell in love with the then 21-year-old nation. I felt as if I was free there, living in the Wild West, and felt a belonging I had never known before. It was a time when so many admired Israel, where, during the Six-Day War, David beat Goliath, the 3 countries surrounding them. So much has changed since then in our deeper understanding of Israel's impact on the Palestinians and within Israeli society. Back then, unaware of all this, I was entranced by the food. For the first time, I tasted hummus, pizza, falafel, kuba, baba ganoush, and so many North African salads that few knew about in the States. When I came home, I dove into Claudia Rodin's Book of Middle Eastern Food that had been published in 1968. I was so impressed with the archival and hands-on roots research she had done into the origins of Middle Eastern food. 6 months later, I made Aliyah, and luckily, after a few months at Ulpan Etzion in Jerusalem, landed a plum position as foreign press attaché for Mayor Teddy Kollek. It was my job to usher around foreign correspondents, introducing them to the many Jews coming from 70 different countries, as well as the Arabs and Christians who all make up the mosaic of this city. I sat in kitchens across the city watching elderly Jewish women cook from memory, trying to translate their abyssal of this or un peu de ceci, a handful of that, into precise measurements that I would later transcribe for future generations. And since Israel occupied the West Bank, we in the mayor's office went there freely, visiting friends and eating in the restaurants. It may be naive to say in today's climate, but it was there that I saw firsthand how eating together can break down barriers. It was also a time in Israel with a new aliyah, that of Soviet Jews, coming after the 1967 war when the USSR stopped diplomatic relations with Israel. With them, they brought an appetite for caviar, ultimately replacing the carp and trout with sturgeon, exporting the fish and its delicious roe to the world over. At about the same time, Israel was also beginning to produce foie gras that was delicious, grilled on a stick in the marketplace of Machane Yehuda. Remember that, Maya? Growing apples and grapes in the Golan Heights that thrived in the cold nights and high, dry altitude. In 1973, a professor going to a conference in New Zealand brought back Chinese gooseberries that he had tasted in New Zealand, as did someone else avocados from Mexico. A decade earlier, a Jewish woman named Helen Klein, also visited from Sacramento, also visited New Zealand, tasted the fruit, and started growing them in California. Soon, Frida Kaplan of Frida's Finest in Anaheim, California, was also taken with the fruit, but not its name, so she changed it to kiwi, a popular native bird from New Zealand. The rest is history. And this is really what Jews have been doing forever, that they've been trying to find new foods that will adhere to the dietary laws, but that just has made them, since the time of King Solomon, to go out and find the world over and bring them back to Jerusalem. But now it's sort of bringing them back to America, bringing them back to Jerusalem. The world is all connected today. It was a time in the new country in Israel of excitement and energy and everything, but gourmet food, when I was there, was not one condoned in the socialist environment that was changing. Eventually, new ingredients attracted American chefs to visit the land and taste them, like Jean-Louis Paladin, Paul Prudhomme, remember him, Thomas Keller, and so many others who would bring back and spread the word about Israeli foie gras, caviar, and of course, Israeli couscous. Although there were no superstar Israeli chefs or great restaurants then, I tasted the panoply of what would become Israeli food, recipes coming from so many countries, hummus that is ubiquitous across the Middle East, mafroon, a baked potato sandwiching meat from Libya, kuba in an Aramaic broth from Kurdistan, because Jewish food has always reflected the place where Jews lived. Once these foods were either in homes or in greasy spoon restaurants, in what was then a humble and wonderful Machane Yehuda market in Jerusalem. Just as Russian and Eastern European Jewish foods reflected the surrounding culture, Israeli food reflects both the people who came to be a part of that culture, whether from Russia, Poland, Germany, Libya, Turkey, Iraq, and the pre-existing cuisine, and how it has continued to evolve through tourists, visiting professionals, and my writing, and that of so many others to inflect both Israeli and Jewish food throughout the world. In early 1973, when I returned from Israel, I tried a hand at freelance writing and peddled my cookbook manuscript. But who thought about Israeli cooking then? Or thought any of the food was good enough to call it a cuisine? I tried 16 publishers before Little Brown bought The Flavor of Jerusalem, which was a cookbook about Jews, Christians, and Muslims in the city of Jerusalem, which sold some 25,000 copies. Middle Eastern food was unknown in those days, except in ethnic neighborhoods. I shared a recipe for hummus with a friend who liked it so much that he told me to market the recipe to Zabar's. I didn't, but in 1986, 2 Israeli cab drivers in New York developed a great hummus recipe marketed as Sabra. Today, those cab drivers' company is owned by Pepsi-Cola. They don't drive cabs anymore. Hummus and other Israeli dishes were gaining favor in America with increased travel abroad and the arrival of so many Israelis, especially after the 1973 war. Not only did chickpeas appeal to returning tourists from the Middle East, hummus and other dishes were beginning to align with new thoughts about healthy food. Chickpeas, the protein of the past, will also be the protein of the future. Having seen the Mosaic of Jerusalem, I was eager to explore the diversity of New York City. So again, I was lucky. I landed a job working for Mayor Abraham Beam to create the 9th Avenue International Food Festival, where we highlighted the diversity of cultures on 9th Avenue. That same year, Nixon went to China and came back with spicy food that Craig Claiborne talked about. Szechuan and then Hunan restaurants soon replaced the Chinese, Cantonese food of my Sunday night dinners as a child. It was the moment that the Cuisinart came to America, based on the French RoboCou, just in time for an explosion of foreign food that at first was made at home, like hummus, falafel, and pesto. Next week, I will use my Cuisinart to grind my fish for Passover and to grate my potatoes at Hanukkah for latkes. Also, actually, to make my horseradish sauce. Americans would never have had the patience to make these dishes in a mortar and pestle. For Americans like me, who took advantage of traveling or returning, peaceful Corps workers, bringing new taste back with them, this was the perfect time to eat and to cook. A year later, I married Alan Gerson, a fine, fascinating, fun, and funny man I had met in Israel, who was born in Uzbekistan to Polish Jewish parents. It was they who taught me so much about Eastern European Jewish recipes and instilled in me a love of Jewish culture and food. We moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Alan taught law, and I studied at the Kennedy School in their mid-career program for a year. At one point then, I brought an early copy of The Flavor of Jerusalem to the editor of Boston Globe magazine. I told him that I would love to write a column for him on ethnic groups in Boston, having an idea that maybe I would get a PhD in sociology or anthropology. He took one look at my book and said, I should write a column on ethnic groups and food, and that was the beginning of my journalistic career. Food writing was not something I had ever thought I would do, but luckily I learned on the job with an editor who took a leap of faith hiring me. Given the lack of staff who really knew how to edit recipes in those days, and my lack of professional background in the discipline of journalism, this job was my baptism by fire. I had a ball taking on cooks, learning their stories, and writing it all down. Until about that time, that Ms. Magazine appeared in 1971 as an insert in New York Magazine. Women's magazines wrote mostly about household responsibilities, including recipes, but second-wave feminism in the late 1960s and early 1970s was getting women out of the kitchen into the workplace. And believe me, advertisers knew it. And so women's pages became bigger. They needed more people to write for them. And anyway, in fact, Betty Friedan, author of The Feminine Mystique, who was Jewish, insisted that women were dissatisfied with their lives and that food could not fill the hunger they felt. This period of the 1970s also saw the beginning of kosher food industrialization. What had once required careful home preparation could now be bought ready-made, such as matzah balls, pastrami, Jewish rye bread, even gefilte fish. This convenience came with both benefits and costs. While it made keeping kosher easier for working families, some of the traditional preparation methods were lost. In 1977, we moved to Washington, where Alan was to work at the Justice Department, and I began writing freelance articles for the Washington Post, quickly becoming a specialist in Jewish cooking. Expanded women's pages, expanded recipes. They needed much more on all kinds of ethnic cooking. And as one editor said, between the Jews and the Armenians, there's so many complaints after the articles come out. They were really happy that I was there. Anyway, while I was working on the Jewish Holiday Kitchen, writing about Jewish, I know I'm going, is it okay that I'm going too long? What? Yeah, that's it. While I was working on the Jewish Holiday Kitchen, writing about Jewish food for B'nai B'rith magazine, then Moment magazine, I more seriously tried to get the exact recipes of these extraordinary home cooks who are now our legacy for the future. While waiting for my baby to be born, I felt I was also giving birth to a cookbook that I hope would include dishes for generations to come, and that was Jewish Holiday Kitchen. Anyway, in the fall of 1970, that same year, of 79, chefs started to become superstars when the American Culinary Federation, this is really important, changed the category chef in the U.S. Department of Labor's Dictionary of Occupational Titles from blue worker or domestic to white-collar worker or professional. This might not seem like something special today, but believe me, for many Jewish mothers, this made it easier to accept their sons becoming a chef rather than a lawyer or doctor, or today, a finance manager. The chef, Jonathan Waxman, told me that when he asked his father for $6,000 to go to cooking school in France, his father's rapid, disparaging response was, "So when you get back, you'll become a chef at Sizzlers." Like many people of my generation, I grew up with the New York Times delivered to my family's front door to be read at breakfast. 10 years after I started writing for the Washington Post, I switched to the Times, for which I've been writing mostly about Jewish holiday foods for almost 40 years. Editors have been respectful and have taken chances with me, accepting articles about Jewish food from such faraway places as India, Yemen, Nova Scotia, and next week, Japan, following me on my travels around the world. I also write occasionally for the Forward and Tablet. During the pandemic, when so many people went back to the kitchen, my son David and I did a cooking show called Joan Knows Best. In the early 90s, Judith Jones, a Knopf editor who had edited, well, you don't have to know all this, okay. I'm sorry that Jewish Cooking in America came out in 1994, and 1 year afterwards, Jerry Seinfeld's Babka episode was on television. So, it was very, very popular, that book. And I appeared, when it came out, I appeared on Good Morning America, All Things Considered. It got all the awards that she was talking about and became an American classic, blah, blah. But to paraphrase Chico Escuela, the basketball player in Saturday Night Live, cooking has been very good to Joan. Later in 2003, but and I'm not saying it's because it's me, but I've made it appeal to the American public. Later in 2003, when Charlotte was going to convert to Judaism in the popular series Sex and the City, the segment was filmed in Eli Zabor's store in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and the camera zoomed onto a stack of My Jewish Cooking in America. My children called to say I was now an icon. Throughout the Middle East, politics plays a major role in the complicated global market. Since the late 1980s, for example, when all trade with Iran was blocked, Israel has become the main exporter of Iran's delicious variants of mint, parsley, and other herb seeds for Iranian-American growers, with the herbs coming through Israel to America being grown in the Central Valley of California. What I have noticed through the years is that with so much intermarriage, many of my readers are the wives or husbands who have converted to Judaism or just want to please their spouse with good Jewish food. In addition, many non-Jewish chefs have become intrigued with Jewish customs, preparing Roman Jewish or Spanish menus and even seders in their restaurants. And Jose Andres, from World Central Kitchen, he had me come over to his house to make like a cholent overnight, and it was unbelievable. It's wild, but I've written about it in my Life and Recipes. Anyway, but the last 2 or 3 pages are written. Okay, that feels as if she's my teacher, Since the 1990s, America has become obsessed with Israeli food. I credit this interest to Yotam Ottolenghi, an Israeli chef living in London, and his book Jerusalem that came out in 1995. Following in Ottolenghi's footsteps, Israeli restaurants changed from dumpy hummus joints to high-end restaurants showcasing their talent for Israelis and tourists alike. I remember one young chef I wrote about in the Foods of Israel, Eyal Shani, who then had a small, delicious, upscale restaurant in Jerusalem called Okeanos, right, in 1989. He moved to Tel Aviv during the first Intifada when no tourists were coming to Israel. At the same time, and it closed, and I forgot about him. At the same time, Israeli chefs were thinking about their culinary roots, getting recipes from their grandparent mothers. Eyal Shani's now international chain of Miznons, with his multi-copied whole roasted cauliflower, makes him probably the most successful of the chefs, receiving a Michelin star in 2022 for his restaurant Shmoneh in New York. Modern Israeli restaurants came to America in the new century, like Mike Solomonov's popular Zahav in Philadelphia in 2008, with Mike receiving Best Chef in America from the James Beard Foundation in 2017. Today, things are changing even faster. Social media has revolutionized how we share and preserve recipes. Instead of handwritten recipe cards passed down through generations, young Jewish cooks are documenting their family traditions on Instagram and TikTok, especially during COVID. Younger chefs like Jake Cohn and other influencers have taken advantage of TikTok and more. While the medium has changed, the essential act of passing down culinary knowledge still remains the same. We're also seeing, gluten-free challah, all that I won't. And when I think about how far we've come since my days at Michigan, I'm amazed by the transformation in Jewish cooking. Today we're seeing young chefs combine traditional Jewish recipes with global influences. Korean Jewish, Mexican Jewish fusion cuisines reflect the beautiful diversity of American Jewish families. The rise of sustainable kosher restaurants, cooking shows from around the world showing such things as apalatkes in Chile with a recipe originating in Poland make me realize how ancient dietary laws and recipes can align perfectly with contemporary food ethics. As I toured the country this past year, sharing my life and recipes with audiences, I reflected on the relationship between food and identity. For all of this has been a difficult year, one where we have had to question our basic identities as American Jews with Israel, and all the things we love about being Jewish have been put into question. Suddenly, after October 7th, we found so many young people who questioned the war and what had been building up since 1967. What this has done to many of us is make us cook food that comforts us, like roast chickens, kasher varnikas, and challahs to share with our families and friends. And who would have ever thought that the phenomenon of Shabbat would become such a comforting event for Jew and Gentile alike? Over and over again, as my guests pick up my homemade challah and say a blessing over it, they smile, relax, and come together as a community. And now, since October 7th, when our whole world, especially our Jewish world, has become so fragmented, I've noticed an increased interest in Shabbat all over the country, with such organizations as Hillel and One Table helping to hold groups of Jews together. I was especially impressed when giving a talk at Alice Waters Edibles Schoolyard earlier this year by a group of 7th graders who started a Jewish group at the Martin Luther King Middle School. Eating together and talking about Judaism gave them strength. We're almost done. When I think back on my life through the Jewish spaces and foods that I've encountered all over the world and reflect on my career, I feel richer for that one night in a Jewish space. The prayers, the music, the Jewishness is something I love, and I feel that my husband's Yiddishkeit enriched my life. 60 years have been gone by since I graduated from the University of Michigan. I'm indebted to the university's role in shaping my food consciousness as much as my cultural awareness from the activism of the 1960s to today's diverse food scene. And throughout my life, I totally understand the crucial role of food in preserving and transmitting cultural identity. This was reinforced by living in Israel, where my identity as a Jew became stronger. Someone once told me that you don't have to live in Israel, but Israel teaches you how to live. I'm so happy that through all these years of travel, journalism, and writing cookbooks, my life's work in documenting and sharing family recipes and food traditions has contributed to the study of Jewish food. And I hope that you will all understand the importance of getting those stories from your grandparents and parents, and if you are as lucky as I have been, to not only pass on the recipes to your grandchildren, to mix the dough with them, happily show them how you braid the challah, and of course, eat the challah or the dough together. By carrying on these traditions, you can create wonderful memories for your children, continuing your Jewish heritage. Thank you very much.
definitely another hour of this fascinating tale, and I'm sure you all have many questions, but we can't keep you here till the night goes, till the sun goes down. So we are now gonna, Joan is we're gonna field some questions. We have these mics. So thank you, and thank you for a really fascinating talk.
I'm sorry I went long of this.
It's like the way in which food and stories intertwine, I think, is a really fascinating thing. You know, the stories that come along with these recipes and the encounters you've had in your life with people are what really I find so fascinating. So please, if you have a question, we will hand you the mic.
No questions?
First one.
Thank you. I was really fascinated that you started off with Proust. And you've gone back to read Proust because so much of its flavor, its...
As an adult, I mean, it's amazing to reread it because you understand life so much more than you did at least when I was at the University of Michigan. It's amazing. You should all reread that and reread like War and Peace. It's fabulous.
But as food, I mean, it's your descriptions.
Right. Well, of asparagus, there are a lot of, and of course, the Madeleine, which was not a Madeleine, but but dunking, which it was really a rusk or a zwieback, dunking something into tea, and it just it falls apart in the tea, but it falls apart. It makes you think of what went before in your life. It's great. Any other? No questions?
Thank you so much for your, I could have also listened for another hour, but there are a lot of stories about the origins of macaroni and cheese in African American communities. And the one I've heard most consistently is that it comes from the Jewish Kugel. And I was wondering if you had ever heard anyone.
No, I really don't think. I think I forget his name, and you'll know the name better than I will, who was the cook for Jefferson. And when he went to France, he learned about macaroni, and you would put cheese on top of macaroni. And it became something. If I was in Virginia, in Richmond, and it was just served everywhere, the macaroni cheese. I don't think that, maybe a lot of cheese maybe put in, but I really think it's, he was inventive, and he brought it back, and he brought back like that? Okay. Yeah. He brought back the macaroni machine, and we could talk later, but I don't think of it. I don't know who told you that, but Deborah, do you think it was Jewish? I think it was real. I think it was he who really brought it back, because Virginia was where Jefferson lived. Now maybe it's everywhere in the South, but boy, did I see it in Richmond. I thought, wait a second, and I had just read about that his bringing it. What happened was there was a slave. He was no longer a slave, right? And Jefferson brought him to France with him while he was whatever he was in France, and that's where he learned about it.
Sally Hemings' brother. Yeah.
What?
It was Sally Hemings' brother.
Who?
James.
Oh, right, exactly. Oh, exactly. But we can talk.
So my mother always told me you could cook, but my family disagrees with that. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? Can anybody cook, and what's your secret for those who are not such with us?
Well, what she said, anybody can read.
If you can read, you can cook.
I think today so many people are scared of cooking. They're really scared of cooking, and I think because they think it has to be perfect. I would get scared. Well, I don't get scared of that much, but, being around somebody like Ruth Reichel, maybe I would get a little scared making her dinner, but not, I don't really care. I mean, I always blame the recipe if it does, I'm testing recipes. But the thing is that I think it's more psychological than anything else. I think anybody can cook. And the thing is that you can't put, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just come to my kitchen someday and you'll see that it is not perfect.
I have a follow-up on that. Do you clean while you're cooking or after?
I'll tell you, I love friends who come over and clean for me. What I do is, I'd like to have Shabbat every single Friday night. So I cook during the week, or especially on the day that I know that my housekeeper is coming, so that she will clean up after me, and it looks as if I've never, and I set the table when she's there too. I mean, I'm really kind of organized that way, so that, and do the most difficult part of whatever I have to do, and then, just, it seems like it's a breeze for me, but it isn't. It's not for anybody. And, right now, all I'm doing is obsessing about Passover, because I know that usually we have it outside. It's going to be cold next week or in 2 weeks. And, I have 35 people coming, which is much more than I want to come. But it's hard for me to say no. And anyway. Any other questions?
I've got one, I guess, is a different version of the same question or a twist on it. Is it thinking of the recipe writer as opposed to the reader, within the thought, if you can read, you can cook. When you think about who you're writing for, do you write recipes differently if you think you're writing to teach people how to cook, say, the food of their youth that they've eaten but never cooked before, as opposed to recipes where you're introducing people to food they may have never tasted before? Do you have to write the recipe differently?
No. I don't think so. I write my recipes for you and for my audience. But what happens, let's say I'm writing for the New York Times, I write it like the recipe. There are no journalists here, right? Or are there? Well, anyway, you'll see when you read the Times next Wednesday. I tested that recipe, and they will change it. They have testers now that the cooking app is so popular, so that you can, there are all these comments, but like when I wrote that, I don't know if you saw the Genius Latkes, the article I wrote for Hanukkah, they had over 700,000 people tried that recipe. Anyway, there were these comments, of course, from Jewish people, probably in New York. How can she have a latke without onions? There's no such thing as a latke. And then I realized I'll put chives in, because you didn't want water in these latkes. And so, and you can't win, I'll tell you, with comments. Yeah.
How many cookbooks do you have?
Do I have? Probably a few thousand. I've never counted them, but a few, maybe 4,000. But in a lot of Jewish cookbooks in different languages. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. Anything else?
There's a cookbook collection at the University of Michigan.
What?
There's a cookbook collection at the University of Michigan.
Oh yeah, I know. It's one of my considerations.
We're encouraging you to think about the University of Michigan as a whole for your collection. Anybody else want to ask?
Well, thank you very much.